Hello and welcome back to the Gluten Free RN. I'm Nadine, and today during episode 45, we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of eating gluten-free or paleo or being on any type of special diet. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Nadine, the Gluten Free RN. Today during episode 45, we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of eating gluten-free or paleo or, even vegan or vegetarian, because that actually comes into play. I'm sure you all have family members or friends or coworkers that kind of give you a hard time for having to eat different or not eat the same thing that they are eating at work as a community, and you have to eat something different. Your people really do not understand why you are suddenly gluten-free after you've always eaten gluten your entire life, even your family members. So we're going to talk about those issues and why it's so hard for some people to change or to even understand that celiac disease is a medical issue. It's not a fad, and it's not going to go away. It's actually increasing exponentially every year because of diet changes, because of the quantity and the quality of the wheat and the grains that are finding their way into our food system. Even in communities or entire countries that never had grains that included wheat, barley, rye, oats in their diet. So yes, we're seeing a shift, and yes, we're seeing celiac disease where we never would have expected to see it. And there's a backlash from that. There is a sense of disbelief. People are shocked when they find out that the food that they thought was healthy is in fact not. It's actually harming them and can be acting as a very, very strong poison to their body. And not everybody is the same, which adds to the mystery of celiac disease. It adds to what some people would consider the difficulty of diagnosing celiac disease or even recognizing it for what it is. So today we're going to talk about those issues and many other things, because this is another very important topic, because some of us beat our heads against brick walls sometimes in an effort to make people understand that this is a lifelong 100% can't cheat, no cross-contamination, must do it or we get horribly ill. And it's very difficult sometimes for years to make people understand that, if I eat gluten, you're not going to like me very much and I'm not going to feel very well. So it's very important that people really understand what is involved with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, celiac disease, and many other food issues. Because most of us, the vast majority, if you're new to this, you'll find out that it's not just gluten, that there's probably other proteins that your body doesn't like very much. And so it's being open to experimentation with your diet, with the food that you are eating, and making sure that your body is healing, number one, that the inflammation is going away, and you're rebuilding your tissues so that your body can be healthy. And we are all our own individual experiments, which is great, but it also can be very confusing, especially if you're new to this and are trying to figure out what all of these terms mean. What is a specific carbohydrate diet? What's a paleo diet? What's a low FODMAPs? These are all interesting terms, and we all have to have a steep learning curve in the very beginning, but continue to learn, continue to experiment, continue to find out how our body works best and with what foods actually are great fuel for our bodies and allow our bodies to heal, and what foods are potentially causing more symptoms or symptoms we don't even recognize until they're gone. And do you have family members that are resistant to even listening about celiac disease or gluten intolerance? People that really don't understand that this is genetic and we are passing these genes on to future generations. And until we actually recognize this and really grasp how important it is to deal with this before future generations have to suffer and get worse or die young, because this really does have very significant ramifications for future generations. It's not just us. I don't do this just for me. I do it for people all over the world, and I talk to people all over the world to make sure they really do understand that this is not just about them. It's not just about me. I don't do this for me necessarily. It does help me, actually. But I want to make sure that people have the correct information so that future generations do not have to suffer the way we've suffered. Removing gluten is not that hard, but it is very important. So you have to recognize what gluten is and remove it from your diet 100%. As Dr. Rodney Ford would say, and he's a pediatrician, gastroenterologist, and allergist in New Zealand, he says gluten zero. You can read any of his books. I find them very helpful and inspiring and really with a lot of information in a very simple, readable book form. Quick and easy, that's what I like. Down and dirty, cut to the chase. So let's get into the psychology of celiac disease. As many of you know, I live in Corvallis, Oregon, and my office, the Gluten Free RN office, is in Corvallis, Oregon. So I walk around downtown every once in a while. I go to the bank and I go to the post office and I walk into different various businesses. And yesterday I happened to walk into a business in downtown Corvallis that I don't go in very often just because I'm not usually in that part of town. And I walked in and I'm looking around probably for about 10 minutes. And the owner finally said, she goes, I hate to interrupt. I know that you're not working right now, but I had to tell you, I've been gluten-free for over a year now, and I feel so much better. But I couldn't get my doctors to test me. I had a really hard time with my family understanding what I was doing. But I was 40 years old and my body was falling apart, and I didn't know why. So I've been gluten-free now for a year. And I no longer have bloating. I don't have abdominal pain. Everything works better and my head is clear. I don't have that brain fog anymore. And so she was so excited about the fact that she just felt better and she didn't understand why everyone didn't do a gluten-free diet or everyone wouldn't try it. And I also have that same conundrum. Like, this is so easy. It makes so much sense. And it is science-based, despite what some people might argue. There's a load of information on PubMed on non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. If you'd like to find the science that backs up information, please go to PubMed and just put in celiac disease and whatever other symptom you may be having or medical issue. I can assure you that celiac disease has been linked to a myriad of other signs and symptoms, autoimmune diseases, and every other healthcare issue, skin disorders, liver issues. So just put it in and again, just go searching. But do make sure that you spell celiac, Celiac, and then celiac, Coeliac. You will find different research articles pop up. Celiac, spelled with an O, is the Latin spelling of it. And I do want to make sure that you find all of the research that you're looking for. People have a hard time changing how they eat or changing anything, but changing how they look at food. Anything that contradicts what their food ideology is or their food social history is. Like my grandmother always made Polish foods such as pierogies and homemade donuts and pastries and all kinds of things. And we all ate them, of course. And we loved them. And we loved our grandmothers for making all of these great foods. But they didn't know that they were harmful. They didn't know that the wheat and grains that they were using were actually harming not only us, but them. So unfortunately, both my grandmothers are dead now, which happens. But they did die at older ages, both in their 90s. Not without health issues, believe me. And if they would have known this, or if I would have had this information when they were still alive, I'm really curious to kind of think about, would they have been willing to change? Would they have been willing to, give up their flour, give up their shredded wheats for breakfast, give up all of the things that they assumed were good for them and that they needed because they had constipation and all kinds of other things. I don't know about my grandmothers. There's a chance that they would have changed their diet. But I do know that there's other people in my family and my friends and in my greater social circle who are resistant to change. They're like, well, if my test comes back positive, I'll go gluten-free. But then they don't get tested. That's a caveat. You have to get tested, and you have to get tested correctly. And you have to have somebody that actually knows how to interpret those test results correctly to read them. All the time I have people bring in test results to me and they go, well, my doctor said it's negative. But in reality, it's a positive test for celiac disease, and they either should be given the option of going gluten-free at that point, because the only way you get a positive blood test is to have gut damage, or they should be offered a endoscopy to test for villus atrophy, or to at least look for it. And hopefully by a gastroenterologist that actually understands how to take the biopsies correctly, and a histologist that knows how to read those slides correctly, or a pathologist. So it can be tricky to get diagnosed with celiac disease. It can be tricky. It shouldn't be this tricky, but I can tell you it is tricky for some people. For some people, it's very cut and dry. No problem. They go in, they tell the doctor what their symptoms are. The doctor tests for celiac disease. Their tests come back positive, and lo and behold, they have celiac disease. That's a great situation, very cut and dry. But then it becomes a whole other issue of making sure that the rest of the family gets tested for celiac disease. And that should be mandatory. Celiac disease is genetic. So every other first degree and second degree and third degree relative needs to be tested for celiac disease, whether that person is a relative by marriage or adoption or however they came into your family. I don't really care. I do want them tested for celiac disease because I can assure you, you're going to find people, even in your greater circle, that never would have thought that they had celiac disease, but in fact do. And what we're doing is we're practicing what's called preventative medicine, or finding people that would have otherwise suffered any other healthcare issue, and we're finding them and preventing that. Again, preventative medicine. But we do know that people are very resistant to change. People can get argumentative. They can be more convinced of their ideas about food, and somewhat interesting as far as going out of their way to make sure that they know that you are gluten-free, but they can still eat food that has gluten in it, or drink beer, or eat pizza, or they don't have to care about it. There's also people that are in the dating game, and they're like, I'm never going to be able to date again because I'm gluten-free or paleo or I'm a special diet. Nobody's ever going to want to date me again. I can assure you there's plenty of people out there that are, number one, either gluten-free themselves, will benefit from eating the way you do, and are open to new ideas. Plus, if they love you, they're going to do whatever it takes to be around you and to support you. After I got divorced and I started dating reluctantly, trust me, I did the same thing. I'm like, I'm too busy. I'm not interested in dating anymore. I was married for over 20 years and I thought, okay, I'm done with that. I'm perfectly okay by myself. But once I met Pete and we went out and we had a great time, and he wasn't put off by the fact that I had to eat gluten-free, loved the fact that I was a nurse and was adventuresome. And when I told him, I said, you can't really kiss me if you're going to eat bread and drink beer. He's like, oh, where do I get gluten-free beer? Where do I get gluten-free bread? And from that point on, he went gluten-free, and then he went paleo, and then eventually we did the Whole30 together a couple times. So we are in this very interesting food path together. And the other interesting thing is he thought he was perfectly healthy. And he gene test negative for celiac disease because, of course, we tested for that. So he's not actually celiac, but a lot of the symptoms he had just went away. He doesn't have an upset stomach anymore. He sleeps better. And there's a number of health benefits for him being on our variation of a paleo diet at this point. So even though he's not celiac, he did actually benefit from going gluten-free and then paleo. One of the complaints people will tell me about is that they will feel isolated from their family, people at work or school, and we really do need to feel a part of a community. We really do need to feel that wherever we are, we belong to a group, our people. And I say that every once in a while. I'm like, oh, there's one of my people. So we really do need to feel loved and connected and part of a group or our tribe. And so find those people. I don't care where you are in the world. If you have celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, there are other people that also have the same thing. You just need to find them. You need to connect with them. You need to have those connections and be able to communicate with people that are maybe going through the same thing that you're going through or are now going through what you went through 3 years ago, but you can offer them some insight. So find those people, find your community, join a gluten-free support group or find the paleo people. Go to a CrossFit gym, see if anybody else is doing paleo or some variation of a paleo diet. Find the people that you connect with. And change is good. A lot of people, including myself, resist change. We like our comfort zones. We like the people that we've always known. We like the house that we've always lived in. It's very difficult to change for some people. For other people, it's like, well, if that's better for me, or that house is better for me, or that school is better for me, I'm going to change. So a lot of people get stuck. They get stuck in a rut. They don't know how to change. It's very difficult to change. And if they feel poorly, if people have symptoms that, maybe they have brain fog or they have difficulty with energy or difficulty sleeping, they have to take medications every day, they tend to get resistant to change. And changing their diet can actually be the first step in actually feeling better or getting better physically. But it is hard, especially when there's a lot of media information, there's a lot of social pressure to eat the same way as everyone else, or to buy the products, or to buy into the fact that you're so stressed, you're so busy, your life is so out of control that you have to drive through that drive-through at that crappy fast food place, continue on doing whatever stressful thing you've just, you need to do, whether it's work or any other type of social pressure. Unfortunately, we're finding overall and around the world that as people's diets change into more of a Western type diet, which I'm sorry, we're exporting our nasty fast foods all over the world. But as that happens, people are changing what their traditional cultural diets have been to eating more fast food, much more wheat, barley, rye, and oats than I think they even know about. I actually know they don't know they're eating it. And they just assume that this is normal, that this food is what everybody in America is eating, so therefore it must be good. Well, it's not, so don't eat it, wherever you are in the world. And look at really what you're eating. Really investigate. Just be aware. Doing a Whole30 is a great way to get reestablished with what real food is. And the Whole30 is a whole concept, and people do it worldwide. It's really just taking out all grains from your diet, all dairy, all alcohol, and all sugar. So it's eating essentially a paleo diet, taking out all sugar, all alcohol, and allowing your body just to reboot, to recognize what real food is, because you're preparing all of your own food. And basically it's meat and fish, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables. Very simple and very easy to prepare. This is not a big deal. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's a good way to reboot your system and make a change, and then realize how you feel. Reevaluate what food is, reevaluate what your baseline is. So change is good. And as adults, we should be adult role models. So many children are getting diagnosed with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So the adults in the family need to be really strong role models. One of the worst things I see sometimes is that the parents of children that have celiac disease continue to eat gluten in the house, or they're not really 100% on board. And they really need to realize that they are the role models for their children. And it's important that if a child is in a house where the family members still consume gluten, that their risk of cross-contamination or contamination is enormous. So the child's welfare really does need to be put first. The entire house needs to be gluten-free, at least while the adults are preparing food for the child and making sure that the family is, in fact, gluten-free and safe from cross-contamination. Like I said, it is really difficult to change how we eat. It's how we deal with stress. Food is instant gratification. It's comfort food. Typically, that comfort comes from the narcotic-like effect the gluten has on our brain. If you pay attention to most of the comfort food that we all were conditioned to believe was comfort food, it's typically pasta, carbohydrates, sugar, pizza, very easy, simple foods that are wheat-based, wheat and dairy, wheat and dairy, wheat and dairy. And those foods actually have a narcotic-like effect on our brain. We are essentially narcotizing ourselves with food that we're eating. So food is chemicals. When we're eating the food that actually causes us to feel good, we should ask, why do we feel better when we eat this food? Or why do we feel euphoric or sleepy? Because it's typically the food that we're eating and the chemical reactions that are happening in our brains. Also be aware that food is relatively cheap in the United States. I found out it's much cheaper in Asia. So it's much easier to eat out in Asia, like in Thailand and India, because food is so cheap. You can get it anywhere, and it literally anywhere on the side of the highway, from food carts, restaurants. It's relatively cheap. So people have a hard time making food and then eating it in their house. It should not be a chore. It's so easy. And we really do need to reevaluate how easy it is to make really good food. The other interesting thing, and I've spent a fair amount of time in hospitals recently with people that were sick or having pieces or parts taken out, which sometimes my people do. I have one friend who had a kidney taken out from kidney cancer. One person had a hip fracture. If you go to your local hospital, please check out what they're feeding people, what's in the vending machines, and what's in the gift shops, what's in the wherever you can get food. In the 2 hospitals that I visited most recently, there's a bunch of packaged food. It's prepared, so all it has to be done is have it heated up. And it's really icky. And by icky, I mean it's food that is not really food at all. Plus there's energy drinks, which have a lot of chemicals and sugar, and nothing in any stretch of the imagination that is going to make people better or help people heal. They're not nutrient-dense foods. These are foods that are actually toxic and full of sugar, and I couldn't even pronounce some of the chemicals, and I'm pretty good with chemical names. So if I can't pronounce a ingredient in a packaged food, I'm certainly not going to eat it. So my rule for eating anything that's in a package, and it should have 5 ingredients or less, and I'll make an exception for something that might have more than 5 ingredients, but for the most part, 5 ingredients or less. I must be able to picture what every ingredient is. I know what a cashew is. I know what a dried cranberry is. I know what almond flour looks like. I know what coconut flour looks like. I have no idea what hydrolyzed vegetable protein is. I have no idea where it comes from, at which point I put that product right back up on the shelf. I know there's a lot of people worldwide that post pictures of ingredient lists to support groups and to Facebook pages and different things where people with celiac disease come to get information, and they say, "What do you think? Do you think this is gluten-free?" And I'm like, I can't pronounce half those things. I have no idea what natural flavoring is. Why are you even asking? Put that right back up on the shelf. We're finding things that are labeled gluten-free are not. There's no oversight for corporations or companies actually labeling things gluten-free. So it is really important to be your own best advocate. And then if you're an advocate for someone else, either a parent or a teacher or a nurse or whatever you are, that you have a high index of suspicion that these things actually contain gluten. Because if we don't 100% remove gluten from our diet, then we're still going to be sick. We're still going to have to deal with medical sequelae that happens because we're still getting gluten in our system. And there's multiple studies that show that certain percentage of people that just don't heal. And what I find and what I've observed over the last 11 years is that people don't get better because they haven't completely removed the gluten from their diet or the dairy or the other things that are still causing inflammation in their body. And one of the main things that we have to do is allow our villus atrophy to go away, and that takes 6 months to a year, and really work on getting rid of the inflammation so that we can rebuild our immune system. Those are the goals. Oh, and I wanted to mention, because I thought this was a funny story. Back when I was considering dating again, I was on one of the dating sites, and there was this really attractive person, looked good. He was a farmer, which I thought was great. He had, like a paleo type setup, organic, everything else. And then come to find out, he goes, well, I know that you're celiac. Does it matter that I'm a wheat farmer too? I'm like, oh, deal breaker. Can't date a wheat farmer. If he wanted to change to grow, amaranth or something, then maybe. And the interesting thing for me is I never would have imagined that I would be the one that had celiac disease, that I was the one that was going to have to be kind of picky about what I ate or say, no, I can't eat that. I'm sure it's a karmic backslap to me because, I used to give people with food allergies or intolerances a hard time. I used to be that person. Karmic backlash, that's fine. I get it. But I've always had celiac disease. And when people with celiac disease are eating grains or gluten or whatnot, it makes us irritable. So those people that are still difficult or causing you grief because they're mocking you for being gluten-free, they need to be tested for celiac disease too. It's difficult, but just, keep mentioning it in a non-threatening way. Even if, science and their symptoms and everything else points to it, they're not going to change until they're ready. Some people immediately, they're like, tell me what I need to know. Tell me who I need to go see. Tell me what tests I need, and I'll get it done. And regardless of what those tests show, I'm going to go gluten-free because I want to find out if gluten is a problem for me. Those people are great, but they're few and far between. It's typically very difficult for people to change, like we talked about, because they don't want to be the one that's different or picky or the other or needy or annoying. They don't want to call attention to themselves. Even myself, I'm a world expert in celiac disease. People doubt that I know what I'm talking about. And it seems, like people think I'm foolish or I get questioned all of the time. And it is embarrassing sometimes to be out and have to talk about what I do for work or why I talk about gluten all the time and being gluten-free or paleo. Sometimes it's great. I love having those conversations, but sometimes people get angry or they mock or they laugh, which is fine. I can take that. I can deal with that. But if you're a child or an elderly person in a nursing home or in a facility and you're trying to explain what you need and people are looking at you sideways or rolling their eyes, that's when it gets really hard for people. I can take care of myself. Can you take care of yourself? Can your children take care of yourself in those situations? It can be demoralizing. And even going into a grocery store or a restaurant where you can't eat 98% of the food. I don't go into a restaurant where I can't eat 98% of the food, but going into a grocery store, it can be demoralizing. If I go into a grocery store and I'm not sure, number one, if I can't read the labels for whatever reason, it's in a different language or there's information that is confusing, which marketing information can be confusing. I stick with the organic fruits and vegetables and things I know are gluten-free. There's also going to be the grandparents or the aunts or uncles or the neighbors that think that feeding kids gluten-free or paleo or whatever is abusive or it's too restrictive. Trust me, there are some people that take everything to a fanatical level. I encourage people not to be fanatical about any of this. to be, this is just how I have to eat. This is perfectly okay. Trust me, my kids aren't abused. There's nothing restrictive about this. The food that we eat is actually great. They're growing, they're thriving, they're learning. Everything is good. And they're not missing out by not having some of the traditional childhood foods. And looking back, if I could do it all over again, there's no way I would have fed my kids what I fed them. So I have a little bit of remorse about that, but then I have to go, they're adults now. They get to choose what they put into their bodies, but they also know that it will impact not only themselves, but future generations. So that's the information I want people to have. And I'll stand by. I'll be supportive no matter what you choose to eat or how you choose to live, unless things go awry. And then we have to talk again. There's also the psychology of denial. People are told they can cheat every once in a while, sometimes by healthcare providers. You really can't cheat. I tell people, you can cheat if you want. It's not going to hurt me. It's going to hurt you. And even a breadcrumb, a dusting of flour will cause the same autoimmune response. So they really do need to be aware of that. And I did a whole talk on why I'm morally opposed to a gluten challenge, because it causes organ damage, and why medical professionals think it's a great idea to prove that somebody has celiac disease by causing organ damage. I cannot wrap my head around even a little bit. And more I talk to people that have done gluten challenges, and they say they've never recovered from them. They were never able to physically recover from a gluten challenge. They did it. They don't know how. They couldn't function. They developed worse neurological symptoms than they had, and they are not recovering. So it's extremely important that people not do a gluten challenge, not cheat, and actually recognize that gluten protein is extremely powerful, not just a toxin, but a neurotoxin. And that celiac disease is primarily a neurological disorder. And then there's the people that say, well, I'm gluten intolerant, but I don't have celiac disease. And I always ask them, have you been genetically tested? Do you know if you're a gene carrier for HLA-DQ2 and or DQ8? Because these are the people that will say, well, I'm gluten intolerant. I'm not as sensitive as you. I don't really have celiac disease. Really? How do you know? And I always tell people, just assume you're as sensitive as I am. Whether you have symptoms or not, that damage is still happening. That's why some people truly do not have symptoms when they consume gluten. But then we find out through lab work or some other catastrophic event that they were still consuming gluten and that damage was still happening, whether they had symptoms or not. But if people want to consume a beer every once in a while that's not gluten-free and say, you know what, I felt horrible, but I still did it. I was willing to deal with the consequences of that beer or that pizza or whatever. I'm like, really? Because that damage can happen and you may or may not recover from it physically. And people really do have to be aware of that. They have to have the correct information, because even a breadcrumb, a dusting of flour, will cause the same autoimmune response. And it's very important that people understand that. So we talked a little bit about the psychology of eating gluten-free. We touched on a number of topics: families, working, hospitals, schools. Pay attention to what people eat, by the way. Doctors, nurses, teachers, these are our role models, and you really do have to be aware of how healthy you are. People that work in hospitals look extremely unhealthy. The nurses, the doctors, the respiratory therapists, they don't look healthy. And these are our role models for health. Try to stay out of a hospital as much as possible, but if you have to go in to visit someone or if you're in there, pay attention. How healthy do people eat? And what are those doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists and anybody else that works in a hospital, what are they eating? You know, the most interesting thing, what is your registered dietitian eating? That will tell you a lot right there, especially in a hospital. There's a whole other little homework thing to do. If you find yourself in a hospital, just pay attention to what people are eating and how they look. Are they healthy? Are they overweight? Do they look tired? How is their gait? How are they walking? Do they walk like a healthy person? As a nurse, I find this very fascinating. And I find people that look horribly ill all the time, despite the fact that they think that they're healthy. But that's me as a nurse. Just pay attention. Open your eyes, be awake, and look at the people in your environment because it's very telling. Well, this has been an interesting episode, and I'm really glad we all talked about this. There's one other thing I want to mention, though. I'm going to go out to restaurants, places I eat, and I'm going to take the NEMA sensor, which tests for gluten, and the Easy Gluten test strips that I've been using for years. The NEMA sensor is a new product that came out this past year, and the Easy Gluten test strips have been around forever, and I've used them for the last 11 years. I'm going to go out and do a little bit of a study and find out the food that is being fed to me in restaurants, whether it's gluten-free or not. Because trust me, they all say the food is gluten-free, but I really want to test it. And so that will be another episode coming up. I was thinking that I was just going to do products, but I'm really going to take it out into the community that I live in and where I eat. And I'm going to test the food, and I'm going to post that on Instagram and Facebook. So if you're not already following me on Instagram and Facebook or Twitter, please keep in mind that I post a lot of interesting information and some pictures, and it's a good way to continue to follow along with the Gluten Free RN. At this point, I'd like to thank all of the people on Prince Edward Island, in Arkansas, in Dubai, all of the people in India, my new best friends, since I was just there for the International Celiac Disease Symposium. A huge welcome to the one person in France who has downloaded the Gluten Free RN. Welcome, France. And also, interestingly enough, on the geographic information, there are several people from unknown. So welcome to all the people from unknown. I don't know where you're from, but thanks for listening. And of course, all the people that have been around since episode 1 of the Gluten Free RN. Please feel free to rate the Gluten Free RN podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to the Gluten Free RN. And leave a review. It helps other people find the Gluten Free RN podcast so they can get this information also. I would really appreciate it, and thank you for doing that for me. As always, I'm here to share what I know about celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I'm here to inspire you to make sure that you are as healthy as you can be, and share other ideas about things that might help you move in a better direction or choose better food for yourself and your families. I hope this information is helpful. Feel free to contact me if you have any issues or questions or concerns so that I can make sure that I'm addressing all of the topics that are of interest to you. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Gluten Free RN podcast. I'm Nadine Gruskowiak, the Gluten Free RN. And do try to remember that if you think celiac disease doesn't affect you, your family, and your friends, think again. Thanks for joining me, and I'm looking forward to the next episode. I hope you are too. Bye.